state-of-the-art heating plant and other things that go along with that. We have found a need to come to you, the general public, to help fund our school so we can continue providing the high standard of education that we are accustomed to here at Alma. Tonight, we have with us, as well as we have the board, we have Joel Bruner, Corey Hansen, Todd Mao, Doug Kane. We also have representatives from PMA, a financial firm who did analysis for us, Scott Gralla and Michelle Weiberg. We also have from MEP, a energy consulting firm from the Eau Claire area, Greg Zane and Andy Fair. And we also have present tonight, I think, the majority of our energy committee, which consisted of Joel, Tom Brackey, Vern Stone, Marv Rick, Dave Ernie, and Dwight Ruff. Now, at this time, Steve Sailmeyer will introduce our first representatives on the agenda tonight, and that is the Energy Study Committee, or Energy Study representatives.
Thank you, Dennis, and I guess thank all of you for coming out on a night like tonight. We hadn't planned for this, believe you me. About this whole process started of our taking a strong look at what was going on. We have known for quite some time, with declining enrollment and increasing property values, that our state equalized aid was going to be going down. It hit us about 3 years after it hit the Pepin School District, with the property value increases that they've had there. Again, because of recreational land and lake land for them, or river land, they call it a lake. Mr. Quinn and I get into that. I tell him it's a river, he tells me it's a lake. But that had been going on there for quite some time. Basically over the last 7 years, we have been experiencing the declining enrollment has been over a 10-year period. The decline in state aid has fallen in with that, but really became exacerbated when our property values started to go up here. When you look at funding in our state, it takes a look at, to get equalized aid, it takes a look at the property values per pupil, and of course the number of pupils and the expenditures per pupil. Well, when you have fewer kids, the fixed costs bring your cost per pupil up. That's an automatic. Transportation, keeping the building open, low incidence situations in our school, all of those costs are staying the same. There's just fewer people to count against the expenditure per pupil. It's also counted by the property value per pupil. Well, we're kind of in the perfect storm here, where our property values have went up, our enrollment has went down, our costs have stayed the same, and some costs, such as energy costs until recently, have skyrocketed, leaving us in really kind of a tough situation. So it was a little over a year ago that we started taking a look at this, and last April we hired an energy engineering firm to take a look at our school district and what our situation was and what we could maybe do to save some costs on energy. 12 years ago, we spent $18,000 a year on heating oil. 2 years ago, we spent $124,000. Last year we spent $115,000. That really opens your eyes when you look at that kind of change over a 10-year period. So anyway, the study's been put together, and the two people representing representing MEP Associates out of Eau Claire tonight are Andy Lafayette and Dale Zank, and they have a presentation that they would like to summarize what the energy study showed us.
Good evening. Thanks, Steve. I'm Dale, and this is Andy. I'm the project development person for MEP Associates. Andy is our energy engineer that did a lot of the calculations and some of the final scope design of the couple different projects that we're going to recommend here. When we do a project like this, the first thing we do is set up a scope, meeting with the board, taking a look at what is the purpose of the study. And the first thing is to take a look internally at the infrastructure of the building, the lighting, the HVAC, the boilers, controls, windows, and all the critical equipment that is in each classroom that goes with that. Then we take a look at possible energy savings. We take a look at operational savings and what it's costing to repair, etc. And the other thing we look at is safety. We look at ventilation needs. Older buildings a lot of times are not up to code as far as what the ventilation requirements are, so that's part of the study. And then we also just look at plain comfort issues. So as part of that study, the biggest thing that was driving this is a lot of the infrastructure. The older part of the building here is well over 60 years old. You've got your life out of it. Average life expectancy, like a boiler, a lot of the equipment is 30 to 35 years old. So we're operating well beyond what a lot of this equipment was meant to operate. Not all of it's operating. Some of it's just old and needs to be taken a look at. The full report, and he has a copy here, is in the office. So if anybody wanted to look at all the numbers and all the detail, there's quite a bit of detail that goes into this, but there is a full report that will be in the office and available and stuff. So if you take a look at the projects itself that we looked at, the first thing is what we call the heart of your building, which is your boiler plant. And your boiler plant is, like I say, about 60 years old. It's an old steam system. The inherent problem with steam is, in order to get enough pressure and enough heat out of steam, we have to heat it up to 230 degrees. What happens in this building is a lot of the building is hot water system, but we have a steam boiler, so we're heating this up to 230, and then we're bringing it back down to about 160 to 180 degrees. So we have a lot of wasted energy, and that other 50 degrees that we're really not even using, we'll bring that back down. Steam also requires a lot of chemicals. There's a lot of pipe deterioration that you get because of corrosion with steam. You have traps that have to be maintained. It's a fairly high maintenance type of system. Your boilers are probably operating in the 60 to 65% efficiency range, where the new boilers now are 90 to 95% efficiency range. So you can see there's a huge difference just in the efficiency rating for the new boilers. Controls, a lot of them are non-functional, which means they're not working. Pneumatic controls are pretty well done. It's hard to find technicians that even know how to work on pneumatic controls. There's still some of the older guys around that started in pneumatics, but everything is switched to the new digital controls. Parts are getting very expensive. Good example are thermostats. They run right now, I think pneumatic thermostats are over $150 a piece. The new digital stats are 15 to 20 bucks a piece. A lot of them aren't being made anymore. It's hard to get parts, etc. So it was another issue that we had to take a look at. Lighting, you have some older fixtures. Tom's been working on some, trying to upgrade some of these. These fixtures in here are metal halide fixtures. Just about all the schools have converted down to high efficiency fluorescents. A couple things that are inherent here. One, these are expensive to operate. They're expensive to purchase. The bulbs are expensive. The other thing with these bulbs is they take warm up. So to shut them off, it takes time to warm up. We convert the buildings to high efficiency fluorescent bulbs, which can be turned on and turned off. But we also combine that with motion sensors, so if no one's in the gym, the lights go off. If the lights go off, we shut the air handlers off, so we're not bringing in outside air because it doesn't pay to continually heat a building or a room when there's nobody in there. Especially now, you take even this gym, the air handlers are sized for full capacity, which is a couple hundred people. That very seldom happens. Most of the time there's nobody in here, such as at night or early days or summers. Or there's only maybe 15 kids in here, so why ventilate to that extent? So by being able to switch your lights, it's not only just saving the energy on your lights, but it's also saving the energy of being able to shut the building down and not bring in all that outside air that we have to condition and stuff. So there's some pluses there. Your electrical service in the building is maxed. Basically, if we had to add a additional walk-in cooler or something, there's not enough capacity in the building left to add any more equipment. So as part of this project, it's a matter of bringing that electrical up and to add some capacity for the future. Windows, many of the windows, as most of you know, are single pane, no thermal break, poor shape, same thing, 60 years old, very, very poor condition, a lot of leakage, a lot of cost that we just lose in heat, and then again, it's a comfort issue on the windows. Unit ventilators are the same thing, 60 years old, dampers that are no longer working and functioning correctly, some are staying open, some are just made closed, just with the fact we get so much cold air through them, old motors, old insulation, and it's time that they just need to be replaced. When we got to this point then, we ran through several different options of what we would recommend for the school. And when we do this, and we sit down with the board and Steve and even amongst ourselves, and we have these 10 or 12 options, and we keep shuffling them back and forth, and it's amazing that as this is a funnel, the couple things that really make sense sort of fall out of the bottom. And what we're looking at here is two different options. The first option is to convert the system to a high-efficiency boiler system. And as I mentioned before, we're talking 90–95% high-efficiency boilers, upgrading all the units within the building, or the heating units, the units within the classrooms, replacing the windows, finishing upgrading the lights, upgrading the exterior lights, the same thing, same situation there. Many of them are quite old. in so basically we would replace the HVAC system, and I guess that's the bottom line with the high efficiency boiler. The other option is to go to a geothermal system as your heat plant, a combination of what we call a hybrid geothermal solar. And what we use is the field out back here as the well field. Once we're done, you already know what's there. The wells will all be well below the surface of the field, so it's still be used as a field. And the idea is that we would use the earth as our heating plant, and we would use the solar as a supplement to that heating plant. And what we have with schools is, most of the time being not open in the summer, with a well field, as we take heat out during a certain part of the year, we also have to put heat back into the system or into the field to keep it balanced at all times. And that's where the solar would help us as far as the balancing goes, because like say during the summer, most schools aren't open all summer long or have a high air conditioning content and we're pulling heat out of the building. So, and the reason we looked at that is so we can get a good comparison on energy. And if you look at in the last page, couple pages there's I guess the next to last page. Right here. You can see there's a substantial difference in cost of 1.8 versus the 2.8 between the geothermal and the high efficiency boiler. But the savings almost double. So if you look out 10, 12, 15 years, the geothermal system is a much better system because of the high efficiencies. And once the wells are paid for, basically they're there for pretty much ever. I mean, they're going to be there for several years. And once they're paid for, you have free heat. So once we get 14, 15 years down the road and those wells are gone or paid for, it's basically free heat. So that's what we want to give a good comparison. The boiler system is a good system. So you do see that a lot, but we are seeing more and more, the interest in renewables, the interest in sustainability, and you do have substantially more savings within the building because the geothermal, other than a little bit of pumping, doesn't cost you anything. So the savings are substantial going that direction. There is an additional cost, obviously, up front to cover. Yes, yeah, and the entire building would be hot water, so the steam would be totally gone. So everything would be hot water. Things that we can do with hot water that we can't do with steam, you get into March, April, May, and then again in the fall, and September and October. Once we get the building warm with hot water, in the old systems, you always had around 160, 180 degrees all the time, and you surge all this heat through the building, you try to cool down, and you surge all this heat. The way the new systems operate, once we get the building warmed up in the morning, is we can maintain the building probably a lot of days with 80, 90, or even 100 degree water. So again, substantial savings because we don't have to heat up that extra 50, 60, 70 degrees of water once we get the building maintained. And I always think of it like a cigarette lighter that's got the little adjustment on it. That's how these new boilers operate. The flame just floats all day long, and we keep that heat circulating through the building and substantial savings and stuff. So you'll see improved ventilation in the building. One thing I didn't mention with the geothermal is the building would be air conditioned. Which again, that's going to be a personal preference. But we are seeing more and more schools as far as going longer into the summers, the climate's changing. With the geothermal system, there would be, the building would be air conditioned where you'd want, obviously you can shut it off, but when you have summer school and things like that, you'd be able to air condition those areas and stuff. So that's another big plus with geothermal. If there's any technical questions or any other questions?
Explain what the air conditioning does to the bathroom for the heating system.
Or
how it recharges the
heat? Yeah, that's what you're talking And then, again, what Steve was saying is, with the geothermal system, I always think of it as a sine wave. You always want to maintain that well field. And as you're pulling heat out of the system during certain parts of the year, other parts of the year we want to extract the heat out of the building and we put it back into the ground. And so we always want to maintain a constant temperature on there. And there's some design thing that goes into that, because if you pull too much heat out of the ground, you can actually freeze it. So you want to make sure you're balanced all the time out there. So, and that's part of the solar. The way we have this set up here is the solar would help us balance by putting heat back into that system.
Question, with geothermal, would that supply 100% of the heating and cooling with no backup?
In the design that we have here, we have a small, high efficiency boiler strictly for backup, just in case there was an issue. And or, correct me if I'm wrong, also, if we needed to put more heat back into the feed. Yeah, but it'd be just very small. I think our calculations, it was just a few $100s a year that we may need it, but it's a risk factor coverage is what it is.
And also, is there any federal or state incentive for geothermal?
Anybody?
State or federal incentive?
There is, Dairyland Power, right, said they'd give us a little bit of incentive here. Part of the problem here is you're burning fuel oil now. There's not a lot of rebates or grants with being at fuel oil. Most of the focus on energy dollars are driven towards electrical. And you're on Dairyland Power, and they said they would throw some dollars back in. They haven't committed to what, they said they would pay some dollars.
That means, River.
Or river, yeah. As far as the federal government, right now, geothermal, the question is gone. And Focus on Energy is moving, instead of giving rebates over the next 3 years, they're going to phase the rebates out and go strictly to low interest finance. Is what that's their plan. Yes.
So with that, if you would say go with geothermal, would you qualify for more interest going that way? Or would you be able to do the rebate when that 3-year period?
No, we are not a member of, Riverland Electric is not a member of Focus on Energy. So Focus on Energy is basically irrelevant in our situation. Excel Energy, Focus on Energy is a partner with Excel Energy, but Riverland has their own program instead of going with Focus on Energy.
Will you get tax credit for it? Set aside from like energy rebate, do you actually get tax credit?
Well, the schools don't pay taxes.
Yeah, the schools are, yeah. Way back.
I have a two-part question. I assume, is this a pump and dump system or a circulating system on the geo?
It's a closed loop system, it's not a pump and dump
Right,
system.
okay. And I assume the reason for doing wells as opposed to doing slinky hose in the ground, I assume slinky hose cost of installation would be higher than wells because of the area needed for the EPUs?
Actually, when we did the study, we did look at, not a slinky option, but we looked at doing a horizontal bore. And one of the issues we did run into when we looked at that is we could not quite fit what we needed in the area that was available up there. One of the problems you run into with doing the horizontal bores as well is if we hit any solid rock outcroppings, they can't drill through that horizontally, where that's actually advantageous in a vertical scenario because you get better performance on your ground.
And part of this, we did run a test well, so we got good data as far as what the structure is for the ground.
So this is a closed loop, you said?
Yes.
Well, we have a closed loop at our house. Last year when it was cold, we lost our geothermal, probably about March. So what happened here, we lost your.
That's why we have that small boiler. Just as a,
Water is gonna keep it so cool.
no, but what
you're absolutely right, that if we get into a scenario where you would be heating or needing to pull more heat out of that well field than is actually available, you'd lose that asset. Once we pull heat out of there and it's gone, there's no more heat. But what we found through doing an analysis of the school is that the amount of heat that we would need to pull out each year and what we can provide from the ground and put in during the summer months with cooling is more than enough to sustain the school over the winter. So we actually did a fairly in-depth calculation over about a 20-year time span to ensure that our ground would not get cold enough to the point where we could not pull heat out.
A couple things on that too is this building can be operated a lot more efficient than what it is now with the tighter windows, the dampers that are leaking, etc. MEP is knowing Jeff Verlop, the owner, is known all over the United States for geothermal. We're doing studies right now, Andy's involved with one at Penn State University, we're working with Princeton, Cornell, Mina, some very, very high, what we call higher education geothermal, campus geothermal. So we've done this for a long time. And there is some systems out there, that we know aren't always done right, or things change, or buildings change, etc. Our reputation is pretty good on site.
So you've got some geothermal in the school?
Yes. Yep. There's not a lot in Fond du Lac. There is the Menominee School District is the other one. We're doing Menominee right now. As far as the closest one goes here. Fond du Lac's been in place for 6-7 years probably. And there's 3-4 more down toward the Madison area. We've got geothermal also.
Another question I had.
Fond du Lac's done a pond, sort of a combination pond and well.
Another question I had was, I see you're putting TA lights.
T8, yeah, T8, excuse me, because some of the fixtures, some of the older pictures were T12s, and the new fluorescents are T8s.
Why would you go LED?
Well, one is cost. Yeah, they've dropped tremendously. And I think part of it is down there, he started changing some of them, I think you're like 3/4 of the way through going to T8s. And that's a possibility. I mean, when we get to that next step, if the district decides to move forward with this, that next step, we can do a comparison and see. But yeah, the LEDs have dropped tremendously just in the last year or two. Yep. I think when we looked at the T12s, T8s, we were down to like less than 100 left that needed to be done. So it was sort of cleaning up what we had.
Just an additional comment I wanted to add to your question that I didn't address is the other part of the geosystem that we have designed in would be some solar thermal collectors. So when we're monitoring our ground temperature over time, what we can do is if that ground temperature starts cooling off, we need some additional heat to be dumped into that system. We can run these solar panels over the course of the summer and just dump all that heat that we're getting for free from the solar panels into the well field, basically maintain that temperature. So that's another way we can add some heat to that system and ensure that that temperature doesn't drop to a point where we can't operate.
Just one quick thing. With the geothermal option and the graph we got here for forma, the bottom line is over a 15-year period, the geothermal is going to pay for approximately 50% of that. So that's pretty substantial that you're going to get that kind of savings for all that. Yes?
Getting into life expectancy of equipment, the stuff we have now is antique, of course, so the high efficiency boiler compared to the geosystems, you're guessing, but what do you think life expectancy on each of those different systems are?
We go by ASHRAE, which is Association of Heating, Air Conditioning Engineers, that do up the studies on those. The new high efficiency boilers, and when you look at them, they're not much bigger than this podium. They're a little bit freaky on both sides of the biggest thing is they're not overly expensive to replace them. I mean, they're $20,000-$30,000 versus the old steel boilers, which would be 80 to 100,000. But the new boilers, they say about 15 to 20 years. And again, a lot of that is maintenance, a lot of it's your water quality within the building. You know, like lovely Wisconsin, but super hard water. And sometimes that is, you know, and a lot of it's your pH levels too, and stuff like water. Yeah. Rebecca, will you?
Thank you, guys.
Michelle, would you and Scott like to go now and I'll re-download this? At this time, you're going to have to put up with me a little bit later. I'd like to introduce Scott Gralla and Michelle Weiber from PMA, our financial consultants at looking at the project.
districts throughout the state. I live and work out of Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and I work with districts far northwest is Superior, northeast is Marinette, Kenosha, and Mineral Point. So we cover the whole state. Districts large, small, wealthy, poor, increasing enrollment, declining enrollment, you name it, we work with them. So I've been doing this is my 10th year, doing financial forecasting for school districts. And prior to that, I worked as the finance manager at the Stevens Point area public schools. So when this product came out, and we were the first, we meaning Stevens Point Public Schools, the first to sign on for this, and I had the opportunity to jump ship and actually head up this adventure. Couldn't pass it up. So what we're going to do tonight is show you a little bit of how we put your district's forecast together, some of the data that goes into it, the process itself, and how we've used it to work with your board tonight to kind of whittle down some scenarios, some what-ifs, and present to you some numbers tonight that we can look at going forward. So what is this financial planning program? It's a highly interactive process where we look at 11 years of data, 5 years of history, current year budget, and project out 5 years. So we're always working with 5 years of data. Some of the key data that goes into this, and I mentioned the 5 years of history, we're pulling all of your financial reports that your district has submitted with the Department of Public Instruction. Your current year budget, very, very important. That is the cornerstone that we build off of. And then we go forward, as I mentioned before, 5 years after that. When we look at enrollment, I mean, that really does drive your revenue, so it's important that we not only look at your enrollment in total, but also look at it by the types of students that go into figuring out or calculating your finances. We have our resident students that are attending the district, but we also have non-residents that attend Alma. And they have Alma, I've been told not to pronounce it that way. Which one? Alma? Yes. So those non-resident students have tuition that come with them, but we also have some students of ours here that attend other districts for open enrollment. We have to pay tuition expense on those students. So we've accounted for all the students, different types, by grade level, looking at what's going to happen in the future. We've accounted for your teacher's salary schedule. We know where every teacher is placed on that, and we've been able to apply assumptions onto that moving forward. We account for all the benefits that are provided by the district. We look at your equalized valuation, very important. We look at history, and then we look at where we're at and where we're going, because that will largely drive our mill rate. We'll talk a little bit about an aid situation, how that might impact that also. The model time does reflect current state law in terms of revenue movement calculations, and state aid calculations, and all those various assumptions that go along with that. And as we all know, within a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, our governor will be presenting the next biennial budget. We're not building in any changes to that at this point in time, but it's something we want to keep an eye on and be mindful of. So we're going to look at a quick summary of the 3 key areas of assumptions: enrollment, revenue, and expenditures. On the enrollment side, beginning with the residents in district, there are a couple key variables that are important here. We're looking at incoming class sizes of our 4K and 5K to 15 students. Right now we have 15 in the 4K and 20 in the 5K. When we deal with those students that are already in the system, we roll them up with a cohort survival method. It's simply a fancy term for looking at progression from year over year, with students going from first to second to third and so forth. What we see happening is a decrease of 20 students over the next 5 years. And the decrease by year, next year we're looking at a drop of 6, then 7, 2, 1, and 4. Our resident open enrollment students, our students attending other districts that we pay tuition expense on, is currently 10 students, and we close it at 10. We can see it's pretty well spread out over the grades. There's not a large class going out or small classes going out, so we felt pretty comfortable with that. Luckily, we have a disproportionate number of non-resident students coming into the district. We have 45 open enrollment students coming here from other districts. So that difference of 35 students is important to keep in mind. Each of those students, the tuition on them this year is $6,635. Key assumptions on the revenue side. Your revenue is pretty much driven by your pupil enrollment and the per pupil revenue limits that the state allows each year. We just came off of 2 years, this being the second year of our state biennial budget, of $75 per pupil revenue limit increase. We've carried that forward in the future years. You don't have to look very far conservative with this. And we've had a couple districts ask us to look at zero, the gloom and doom. But we think running with the 75 and casting that forward is reasonable and conservative. The other half of your revenue increase that you've had the last 2 years, that you will not receive the next 2 years, or into the future, at least under current state laws, per pupil categorically, that was a new revenue source that came in with this last biennial budget. That is paid for 100% by the state. Current state statute says it's currently at 150, and it will stay at 150 in the future. So for all intents and purposes going forward, we've had 150 in the past, 75 to 75, but we're going to get 75 in the future. Valuation in your district, you grew at 3.8%. This last year, statewide average was 2.4. So you actually grew a little bit faster than the state. Normally that would hurt you from an aid perspective, but you're already in a situation when you have declining enrollment and your value per student is where it's at. You fall into a situation where you're going to lose aid each year. It's a formula that is a hold harmless formula. You never lose more than 15% of your previous year's aid, but that's the situation we're in. It's all formula driven and there's not much that we can do about it. We do see this in districts where they're very property wealthy and experiencing some declining enrollment. In terms of new aid coming into the budget at the state level, we're looking at about a 1% increase, and with tying that strictly to the per pupil increase of $75. The state contributes about $4.2 billion into state aid, and a 1% increase, or that $75 per student statewide would be about $42 million, so it's a very reasonable number. Actually, less than what the state has put in the last 2 years. Lastly, on the revenue side, very important, as we talked about the disproportionate number of open enrollment students, that increase in future years is linked to whatever the per pupil revenue limit increase is. So next year, that will go from 66.35 this year to 67.10. Lastly, on the expenditure side, we're looking at our largest expenditure, salary benefits, growing on the salary side by 2% CPI. Districts across the state have different opinions on this. We're kind of vacillating between 1.5 and 2.5. There's a new formula of the WERC CPI. Very complicated. It doesn't seem to really make a lot of sense of how they measure different areas of the economy, but we've used 2% CPI going forward. We do have some salary savings when teachers retire. We factored in 8.2 FTEs retiring over the next 5 years. We've kept our staffing level. We've not changed that. And the other big ticket item in your benefit side is your health insurance. We've grown that at 7.5% a year. Your discretionary spending, your supplies, your capital expenditures, and so forth, we've frozen them at the current budget levels. Utilities, we've increased by 5% per year, but we've built in on some of our scenarios here, if we put in either of these two energy projects, that we will have the savings built in. Transportation costs, primarily our fuel, we've frozen at current budget levels. We may come in a little bit better than budget this year with the lower fuel costs, so we just use that level going forward. And then our other district insurances, workman's comp, property liability are frozen going forward. So a couple of the things that we started to build into the model, listening to Steve and Carol talk about what their needs are, we've identified some vans, buses. We built in $20,000 next year for a van replacement, $105,000 the following year for a van and a bus, and $90,000 3 years from now for another bus. Technology spending, we've increased our current year budget by $15,000. That goes forward into all future years. There is a potential for some special ed expenditure reductions. We factored a little bit of that going forward. And then additionally, if we go forward with these energy projects, we've got some choices. The first one, being the high efficiency, has a price tag of about $2 million. We look at a tax impact of that about 86 cents per thousand. Projected annual savings, $58,500. These might vary a little bit different from the engineer's slide, but they're very, very close. And then on the geothermal side, it's a $3 million project. The tax is $1.27 per thousand valuation, and projected projected annual savings of $97,000. We also have an issue with our revenues not keeping pace with our expenditures, as you'll see shortly. So we've looked at a non-recurring operating referendum to help support the revenue side of the district's finances. So why do we do forecasting? Why does the district do forecasting? Providing transparency to school finance. Everything has been out open. Any assumption, any calculation. It's not the district's numbers. We've done this together. Work collaboratively. Provides transparency to you. Board can be proactive versus reactive with their decision making. Does provide a very insightful view into the future as to what the district will look like. Board level of understanding school finance. Your decisions are very data driven. Everything we look at here is calculated. And lastly, it helps with what we're doing tonight, community conversation, sharing this information with you. So if you do have questions as we go through this, please do not hesitate to ask. 40 cents per thousand on the mill rate. And if you move forward, then you can see how these kind of flow out over the next 5 years. So at this point in time, I guess I would invite questions, thoughts, anything on the forecast model itself, questions on the debt from Michelle, anything you might have. All those good questions for the engineers and none for the financial people. Michelle, any thoughts?
Well, I think, you guys can obviously see where you've been in terms of mill rate. I mean, your mill rate, when we look at it compared to certainly your neighboring school districts, is lower. But it has been trending up over the last few years, and that's really because your state aid is going down, as we talked about. You're losing 15% aid every year, year after year. So that's always going to be having some pressure on the mill rate. Unfortunately, you have pressure on the mill rate because you're losing aid, but at the same time, the revenue limit isn't generating enough revenue to cover the expenditures. So you have an increase in mill rate slightly because of aid, because of loss of aid, but you also have deficits. So you have this kind of double-edged sword that obviously the board is grappling with trying to figure out how to address that. And how to address that could come in the form of, as we talked about, potentially a referendum to the voters on April 7th that could ask a couple of different questions of you. One would be to potentially exceed the revenue limit for a set number of years. It's called a non-recurring revenue cap override. That could be one question that you would see. And the second would be to issue debt to finance the projects that they talked about earlier. And I think Steve will talk about some more, whether that be the high efficiency option on the energy side or the geothermal option and other things. Know that those debt options, what they do is a couple of things. They take some pressure off of that operating budget, the deficits that are generated over time. By borrowing that money, whether it's whatever option, the $2 million or the $3 million, you're taking some of those costs that you're paying out of the operating budget and putting it on the debt side of the equation instead. For example, those bus replacements would be taken care of via that debt that was issued from that referendum question, the van replacement as well as you would be, upgrading facilities and installing the high efficiency option or the geothermal option and reducing operating expenses as well because of that. So all of that leads to, hopefully a better fiscal situation long term, but even those solutions don't get you to a point of a balanced budget. There still would be more than likely this need for this referendum question to exceed the revenue limit. And that's a decision that the board has to come to by January 26th, just so you know. They have to adopt their resolutions to go to referendum 70 days in advance. So for an April 7th ballot, believe it or not, we have to back up that much to a decision by January 26th. So part of this evening is just to kind of inform people as to what some of those options are and what some of the tax impacts may look like, and hopefully get feedback to the board so they can make an informed decision by January 26th. Any questions on the finance side?
So how will the tax, look at that, mill rate changes, how much on $100,000?
Yeah, so we are looking at, so going from 1061 to 1354 would be the high efficiency option. So that's a change of $2.93 per thousand. So $293 on a $100,000 property on an annual basis. So take a look at if you look at the fair market value on your tax bill and divide it by 1,000, and the mill impact would be $2.93 per thousand for that option. For the second option, it would be $3.34. So $334 on that $100,000 property. And again, what's plugged in here is not only paying back principal and interest on the $2 million or $3 million option, option, the 2 million being the green, the 3 million being the yellow, but also a non-recurring referendum to exceed the revenue limit to take care of those deficits that we saw on the first slide that Scott put up.
What does the referendum monies actually do? Does it come into the school system to afford these investments? And then does it get paid back? Is the one?
So there's two different types of referendums that are being contemplated right now. So when we look at the 2 million or the 3 million options for capital improvements and replacing the boiler, et cetera, that would actually be a loan that the district would take out and pay back over a 20-year period. So that those funds would come in and pay for those projects over the term it takes to implement those projects, and the district would pay principal and interest payments on the debt for a 20-year period. The second idea here is the revenue cap option, which would allow the board on an annual basis to levy above and beyond what is the calculated revenue limit. So let's say for year one it was $400,000. So in 15-16, for example, the school board would be able to levy $400,000 more in taxes to operate the schools versus what would be under the regular revenue limit calculation. They don't have to go up to the 400,000 or in any year what is allowed, but they're authorized to go up to that amount. So that would still be an annual decision made by them based on circumstances of that annual budget. What you would be voting on at referendum was what it cannot exceed on an annual basis. So there's two totally different types of questions that are being contemplated. We're looking at 20 years, probably under 3%. So obviously a very attractive interest rate environment. If you went to referendum on April 7th, you probably wouldn't be doing the loan until the summertime, so subject to some change in interest rates by then, but still very favorable.
Now, if the board were to decide not to go to referendum, or if the referendum was voted down, what would be the funding options for these mandatory expenses?
If you get a situation like a parent or a forest, where the state has to step in and say, we're in control of we have to have sufficient fund balance, you have to have fund balance. You can't operate at a deficit.
I don't know what happens in the state subsidies. That means that, I'm sorry.
There's, we haven't really had a district go bankrupt. Florence was about the closest to the district going bankrupt. The state stepped in and made some changes. There's talk now of different ideas. We talked about this week, accountability and so forth, and how the state could step in. One of the forms that they could step in to help a district or work with a district is to make it a charter school and they run it. The state would run it. Not to say that that's what would happen, but that's one option the state does have.
And then, first thing would be trying to find a way to balance that budget, which means cuts. So I don't know where those come from. That's not for me to say, but it would first thing be you would more than likely cut before you went bankrupt. You know what I mean? So in Wisconsin, we have no legal, there's no ability for school districts to declare bankruptcy. So that's not even conceivable. It's more that you get to a point of really having no surplus fund, no fund balance whatsoever available. And I don't know, there's probably a lot of misunderstanding about what fund balance even is. It's not money that is sitting in the bank, all year round here at the districts. All it is what the fund balance is as of June 30. And so based on the district's receipt of revenues, which only comes in via state aid and tax receipts, it doesn't come in at any sort of regularity, you hit a low point of cash, throughout the year. And more than likely with a 15% fund balance where you are right now, you probably need to borrow just to cover cash flow downs isn't, money just sitting in the bank on a year-round basis in that amount.
And if the referendum would fail on April 7th, the board would have the option of coming back again before the next school year starts. You can actually go right out to November, the second Monday in November. The states allow districts to go that far out with a referendum for next year. So you might come back and ask for less, and maybe make some cuts with that. That's a plan B, the plan C. Yes.
No.
Is there any capital debt in the district existing right now? And the answer is no. Thank you.
While Steve's getting his program called up here, just want to let you know that sometimes he may, whether it's in our wrap-up or question and answer period, I will present several options that we could do as a school district to become more efficient. It doesn't necessarily mean that these options would be used in the event of a referendum failure. In fact, I don't think they would be viable unless the referendum is passed. And just want to add a note on that. This school district will stay open as long as the people of this school district want it to be open. The board doesn't decide that, because if you're going to school, it has to take it to referendums. So the board doesn't decide that, you, the people of the district. So if you want the school to stay open, it will stay open. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to flip to the last page of my presentation just to show you a little bit about mill levies. All right, this should be in a group of handouts that you have. It looks like this. There's a larger one in another handout. First of all, the school board, back in probably I've been here a long time, so I can tell you, about 1997, 98 school year, we took a look at our enrollment coming in, and we took a look at our preschool, our birth to grade or kindergarten census, and saw that we were going to be in a declining enrollment situation. So we started planning way back then. Our teaching staff back at that time was around 38 teachers. We had 3 full-time custodians. We had 6 bus routes. And we've made cuts over the years. We've cut, well, we didn't cut. Basically, we just did not rehire in situations. We had teachers go back and get certification in other areas that they were able to come back and teach. We started replacing with part-time teachers, and we're fortunate enough to find teachers that would do that. So we've made a lot of cuts. Right now we are at, I think, 29.3 full-time, or 29.2 full-time teaching staff members. We cut, when Mr. Plucker retired a couple years ago, we did not replace that position. But if you want to take a look at tax levies in our area, I put this together for the board. I do it on occasion, but this was back in October when we were going through our budget. I go all the way back to the 2007-8 school year, 8, 9, 9, 10, and so on. And you can see the mill levies for us and all of our neighbors, all of the schools around us. You can see in 2007, 2008, the yellow is the lowest levy in our area. And if you take a look at that, the orange is the highest levy in that area. 2007, 2008, Mondovi was at 7.47 mils. We were at 7.81. Gilmanton and Whitehall were a little lower than us, so we were about fifth there. In 2008, 2009, we were the low. Elmwood moved to the high. In fact, when you look down to 2011 and 12, you see Elmwood remains at the high. They were the highest in the state at 17.02. Elmwood is just a little bit larger than us. 8, 9, 9, 10, we had the lowest mill levy around. 10, 11, we were at 8.65. 11, 12, we were at 8.09. 12, 13, 8.39. 13, 14, 9.47. And this year we moved in, for the first time, into the 10 range. If you look at all of the other schools on the list, you'll see that most of them are there. The 7-year average of the mill rate for the Alma school was 8.28. That was the lowest of everyone. In fact, the next column over, I have a 7-year for $100,000. How much you paid in the Alma school district, and how much you paid if you were in the other school districts. On a $100,000 property, per year you average paying $827 in school tax. Now, then there's the levy tax credit that came off of that. Alma Center, 1,000, you can see the difference there. If you were in Pepin School District over that 7-year period, you paid $1,386. $558 more than we did. If you're in the Elmwood School District, you paid $700 more than we did. They were 17.78% more over a 7-year period than we were. We've always tried to be pretty responsible. We're all property taxpayers. We know what it costs. And we were in a recession at that time. So at that time, the board decided that we would go into our fund balance to take things out. And we had about a $1.15 million fund balance. And again, that's not cash in the bank. What that really means in the simplest of terms is if you shut down on June 30th of a year, that's when our fiscal year ends, and you got all of the assets you had coming in and going out, not the capital assets, but the other assets, that's how much money you should have. It goes by GAAP accounting. Those of you that are familiar with accounting measures, that shows what you're actually worth at the end of the year. That's what fund balance is. It's not cash. I wish it was. I wish it was. The reason it's not, some of our aid for one school year, we don't get until July of the next school year. That's some of the shuffle. The state doesn't work on GAAP accounting, believe you me. They delay our last state aid into July, so they can say they balance the budget. And that's come out of the schools for probably 15 years now. But that's a little bit about our tax levy and where we are compared to others. We made cuts. We decided to go into fund balance, and it hasn't been much. As you can see from that $1.15 million fund balance we had at our peak, We had 800 and some thousand to start this year. One thing about a small school and small school finance, we have small numbers. If we have high need situations come up in our school district, it raises, it can be devastating to a budget. And those things have happened to us in the last couple of years, as far as providing programming needs for students. Okay. Back up to the top. What other things are we looking at inside of this referendum? Technology upgrades. This last summer, we hosted the Rural Schools Task Force. This is happening in rural schools all across the state. Pepin is ahead of us. We were talking about our open enrollment kids. Well, I love them because they're kids, but when I'm the fiscal manager here, I love them because we get $6,800, $6,600 per pupil for open enrollment kids coming into our school district. We have one of the highest percentages of open enrollment students of our student body in the state. And that's something to be proud of. They say schools of choice. We certainly are. We certainly are. But the Rural Schools Task Force came in, and they wanted to see if there was anything different about our school than the others. And I took them on a tour of the school. We talked as we went around. And we went into our computer lab. And our computers that were sitting up on the counters and stuff in that lab were about 7 years old. Most of them we got 3 years ago from the USDA Department of Agriculture. Because they switch theirs out in 3 or 4 year, what is it, Todd? 4-year cycles. And they had a bunch of them to give away, and folks, we were squeezing our pocketbooks. We took advantage of them. They were a lot better than the ones we had. We brought them in, put them into place, and they were working. Well, the Rural Task Force came in. Those were sitting on tables. Piles of computers on the floor. 3 piles of computers. I think there was 24, 25 of them. And one of them looked and said, "Boy, those all new computers?" And I said, "Yes, they are. And we're so happy to get them." Those were 3- and 4-year-old computers that Jeff Wichorik, the last couple of years, has been giving us. He is the IT director at University of Mary down in Winona. And when they change them out, they've come into us. Well, they were much newer than anything we had. Our technology, we hadn't changed because up until the last couple years, a lot of the technology things, a lot of the teaching tools and stuff that teachers have had and that students could learn by really weren't out there. What we used technology primarily for was a word processor and surfing on the internet, and these other computers, even though they were slow, would do that. We lost out where a lot of other schools came in very well, and it was 5 years ago when the Microsoft settlement came in. And the Microsoft settlement, if you don't know what that was, Microsoft was sued for having a monopoly and controlling the software market. So schools all over this state and a bunch of other ones were given money if they had a low poverty rate and if they had, or a high poverty rate was the issue that brought it in. And it was taken from the year prior. The year prior to the Microsoft settlement, we had a 22.3% free and reduced lunch rate. That's fairly low. Our district has typically been a fairly low free and reduced lunch rate. You had to be at 27%. The year, if they had taken the next year, the year we were in, we were at 28%. Not only did we go from 28%, we went from there to 34, we went from there to 38, and we went from there to 41. Talk about the perfect storm. A lot of our federal aid and other things is determined by your free and reduced lunch count. So that didn't help us a lot either along the way. But we didn't get a penny for computers. Pepin got about $80,000. And we were a little larger than Pepin. We would have gotten probably in the $90,000 range. Other schools in our area got $120,000, $130,000 for technology. They put smart boards in all of their rooms. Teachers got iPads. They did other things. We didn't get any. And that put us behind a lot of schools in the area too. So we know we need to do some things in technology. We had Naomi Harm. Naomi Harm used to work for our CISA in West Salem. She went out on her own because she is really good. She works for Intel and a couple other companies, going to schools, large schools, all over this nation, and doing what she did for us for about $800. She does for them for about $20,000, $30,000. But because she's an old friend and has worked with our school and our teachers for years, she came up, spent a few days, and put together a technology study. This is what her technology study said. We need to upgrade our Wi-Fi infrastructure. Prior to this, our Wi-Fi infrastructure is like you have at home, a little router. We had about 5 of them. We plugged them in a room, and if we needed to have Wi-Fi, that's how we had it. Right now, the Wi-Fi is installed throughout our building. We got some help from Matt Olson, lives here in Alma. Came out, gave us some advice on what we could do and how we could put it in. TDS sent their person out to help install. Corey, sitting up here, and Mr. Fratsky, our Wi-Fi is in our building now. We did it for much less than all estimates were to make it go. So we're good there. Said we needed quality mobile teaching and learning devices. Those are for the students. You hear about Chromebooks being in classrooms. You heard about iPads being in classrooms. The big thing right now is Chromebooks because they work better. You can be home, you can be on the internet, and you can do your homework on that. You can shoot it to the cloud. I don't know where the cloud is, but it's out there someplace. And it goes from there right to your teacher's desk the next day. Google Apps for Education has so many things that help students learn. Our teachers in here that use some of these things, and some of the, in the elementary, we have some iPads that we got on a special ed grant last year. There are so many things that kids can do on those, and it makes learning easier. Kids today don't learn like we did. Research has told us that. They have to be involved, they have to be active in doing it. And that's what the new computers and things are bringing to our classrooms. She said we needed to have 5 to 7 iPads for each classroom in grades pre-K through grade 3. Then as you move up to, and 5 desktop computers in each of those rooms. Then, she said we should have Chromebooks for grades 4 through 12. Right now, start with so many in a classroom with so many desktops and work it out. Google Apps for Education. These are the learning tools that go with the Chromebooks. All staff in grades 4 through 12 should know those and should have them accessible to them. Upgrade computers for all staff. You think our lab computers are old? Our staff's computers are even older. The reason that my laptop didn't work here, I had to go and erase Dale and Andy's off of my flash drive. I had to erase it because I don't have enough RAM to cover it. That's why it wouldn't download when I brought it in. So staff computers and technology is old. And there's just so far you can go with that to do the things that you need to do. Smart boards for all classrooms. We had a Reading First grant, which is another reason our levy went up. When it did, if I skip back to that, I can tell you the year. But we had a Reading First grant for 6 years, Jane, or 4?
6.
It was 6 years that we got between $200,000 and $400,000. we were able to use that. I was able to use that to pay a good portion of elementary staff teachers, which kept us from deficit spending. That grant came, it was a part of the No Child Left Behind program under George W. Bush, but it was gone. When it was gone, that left us with about a $400,000 hole to fill. 2 years later, in the 2010 year, the legislature took away from our revenue limit capability $590 a pupil. To a small school like us, that's tragic, because we were supposedly given tools that would help us cover that. In our small school, where we were already pretty conservative and didn't offer some of the benefits and stuff that other schools did, it didn't make up $5 or $590 a pupil. It made up closer to about $240 a pupil. So smart boards for all classrooms, we bought those for grades K through 3 under the Reading First grant. I couldn't go past grade 3 with that. But boy, it's hard to have the K through 3 and the 4th and 5th and 6th grade teachers walk down the hall salivating when they go by the rooms with those smart boards in there. And the smart boards are a wonderful teaching tool. Every one of our teachers that have them use them and use them considerably. I use one in the summer when I teach driver's ed. Instead of my getting up and drawing an engine block on the board and trying to draw cylinders and pistons and all that, I'm a terrible artist. I can't draw a stick man. But I was doing that. Now, I go over the smart board, I go to this computer. I told you earlier I could teach driver's ed, and I go to my PowerPoint, and I hit a button, and then I hit another button, and it goes out to YouTube and shows an engine being installed or assembled, and shows the parts going up and down, shows everything that's moving. I can point them out and show how the four-stroke cycle works. Just a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing. Okay, we said we need new network servers. Yes, we do. Our network is old. Our servers are old. We've been changing out switches so that we can get more power through the internet in the building. We have no problem getting access to high-speed internet here. We have fiber optic into this building. Back in 1997, Chippewa Valley Technical College and I went to the teach board because the teach board refused to bring it up here because there weren't many schools along here and the population wasn't very great. And we were going to put in on that distance learning room, interactive TV on the other end. You had to have fiber optic to do it. The director of the teach board said no. We went to a teach board meeting, the president of Chippewa Valley Technical College and I. And we walked in there and we said, you know, we've looked on a map and we see all these places in Madison that are set up for distance learning. All the different colleges in Madison are set up for distance learning, all the high schools. And they're within 2 or 3 blocks of each other to talk back and forth. I said, we're miles from things like that. From Madison to get that same class, we're 200 miles away. By the time we were done, it was a unanimous vote from the teach board to fund that. That cost the state $780,000 to run from La Crosse up along the river. It deadheads in the Alma here at our school. Right, Corey? This is where it heads. So we were able to get that. We have good access to Wi-Fi. We just don't have the tools to use some of it that's out there available. And the smart board is a big part of it. Our servers need to be upgraded. Our switching is there, but our servers are not. Comprehensive filter and firewall system that we have in now. You know, before we could put our Wi-Fi up, we had to be able to filter out some of the stuff that comes on the internet that you don't want kids or basically anybody else to have. So we had to have a new system. Our old system wouldn't do it. If those of you ever heard the Barracuda commercials, well, Alma School now has a Barracuda system. And it will lock those things out. It will lock them out if you come on right now and try and get into our Wi-Fi system with your phone. Don't try and go to a nasty site because it won't let you get there. And that's what we have to have in schools. In order to get our federal monies, we have to promise that we're doing that, and that's something we want to do. shut off the heat in the room and the ventilation. You have to bring fresh air in from the outside, that's state law. Not if there isn't anybody in the room, as Dale said. These new digital controls, which aren't all that expensive in the new system, can do that. The energy savings come up to quite a bit, as you saw. Thermal pane windows. You know how you stand in front of a radiant heater and you stand back about 5 feet and you just feel that nice warmth? Dennis Centric, I think, can testify, because when we have schoolwork meetings in the library on the cold nights, our back is to the windows. It's about 4 feet away from the windows. Gets a little chilly, doesn't it, Dennis? And Carolyn Greison's room, even around us, even though it's caulked, Mrs. Shostak's room, it gets a little chilly. It's just like having radiant cooling come in. We don't have that in the summer, but we do have it in the winter. Lighting in our building, Tom has changed out almost all now of our old ballast, and we're operating with T8 bulb system as opposed to T8 or T12. That drops the energy consumption by, what, a third? Pretty much, guys? Motors can be set so that they're not all running one speed, and those guys talked about that. Maintenance and upgrades. Most of our roofs in this building are in pretty good shape right now. We just had some repairs that were put in about 16 years ago, 17 years ago. But we do know that probably within the next 4 years that we are going, and it wouldn't hurt to get ahead of it, an area equal to about 1/2 of the elementary school is due for replacement within the next couple of years. And that's the area, the front side we replaced recently, the back side we did not, right, Tom?
Yep.
And it runs over here right along the edge of the gym also. The rest of this school, this gym, all of the high school area and junior high school was replaced about 6 years ago, 5, something like that, and that's a real good roof. The high school gym, the new gym, the roof was replaced 4 years ago, and so we just have that area to replace in roofs. Parking lot. We used to seal coat and have the cracks in the parking lot routed out, and they fill it with this nice rubber stuff, and then they seal coat it real well. You've been into our parking lot after it's been seal coated. Really looks nice, seals up nice. We don't have much of a problem with it. We haven't had the money to do it in the last few years. Most school superintendents will tell you, in the small rural schools, you have made up for the losses that you've taken from the state. You don't do it in curriculum. We haven't cut a program here. We have not cut a program for our kids. You don't do it in trying to keep up with as much curricular things as you can do. You do it with some of these maintenance things, because there's just no place else to go. And that's what's happened there. The parking lot hasn't been done in probably 7 years. It's probably 7 years. Maintenance and repair. Some other things that aren't really big things, but there's something. We've got the floors and the asbestos removed in all of our classrooms. Removed or encapsulated. There's 4 rooms where they're not. And those we know we're going to have to replace. Years ago, it used to cost $20,000 for one of these classrooms to have them come in and take out floor tile that contains about 1.5% asbestos. Now, it costs us about $1,400 a classroom to have it done, Tom, and have the floors replaced. So we have some things like that to do. The family and consumer ed room, that was in there from the start of things, and doors aren't on some of the cabinets anymore. They're old metal ones. You can't get them to fit, can't get them to put back. So some of those things need to be done. A dust collection system in the shop. When we lost our one teacher in semester a couple of years ago, I taught 3 shop classes for the second semester, and it does get a little dusty in there. when we have things going. So that's something we need to look at. An elementary, some things that we haven't mentioned much before. Our elementary school, you know when you go in the door there, there's one set of doors. There's no windbreak. John, what's the rate? Oh, John was back there. I was going to ask you what you call that. But we have the break in the doors so that the wind doesn't come blowing in. We can stand to do that on both the elementary and gym area. And those aren't real expensive items either. Our building hasn't been painted for, let's see, the girl that we hired for summer help was a freshman in college at that time. She's been out of college for 4 years now, so
Yeah,
it's been about 8 years. The south side of our building really needs to be repainted. That's the south exposure that gets the sun. We need to do some of those things. Our dishwasher system, we've got a great repairman. We've got a great repairman. That's the same dishwashing system that was put in when the kitchen was put in. So I would assume that was 58 that happened. I'd have to go back through all the records to make sure. But we're at the point where we have to do something there. Transportation. We've been buying used buses for $10,000 a piece. We're still running one. We've got one going now for 4 years, costs us $10,000, that's $2,500 a year. That's pretty good when you can do that. The problem is the repairs. We found out in the other ones that we purchased, we were spending more in repairs than we would have if we had bought a new bus every 4 years and depreciated it out. Our repair costs, excessive repair costs, would have paid for a new bus, we'd have had a warranty, and we'd have been able to put miles on it. We put over 200,000 miles on our buses before we get rid of them. There is still a school bus that we run between here and Pepin for athletics that was here the year before I came. And I've been here for 26 years. It's a 1988 model Chevrolet bus. It's a great bus. It runs great. It heats up good. We're not going to get rid of it, until somebody makes this, but it's in great operating shape. That's good. The newer buses don't have it. Don't do quite as well as the old ones. They don't make it as good anymore. And we have two buses to be replaced. We only have one van to be replaced, and over the next couple of years. And there's our tax levy again. I also put out some other papers over there, just for you to look at on your own, and it does tell the history of our finances here at school. I'd ask you to take a look at it. There's a bunch of these things. The state prints them out. I can print them out for every school in the state. But take a look at ours. You can kind of see where if something happens where it's a big expenditure for us, it's glaring in our budget, just like it was this year. This year we had some expenses that we didn't anticipate coming into this school year, and those things really drove our budget up. You'll see that, again, when numbers are that way, it's that way, but if you follow the longitudinal studies and the graphs in here, you can pretty well see what happens. If you have any questions on anything at all, give me a call, and if you want to stop in, I can sit down and explain it to you. I'd be happy to do that. But the long and short of it is, the $6,300 or $6,600 we get for open enrollment students, we get $2,800 here. If we had a private school, in the new private school, if you want to get angry about this. The private school choice program that they want to extend statewide. High school students in that program will get $7,850. Private schools to take these kids in. Now these aren't all poor kids. You can be up to 400%